July of 2018 saw the second year of archaeological excavations on Keith Island and the Broken Group Islands on the west coast of Vancouver Island. This was a collaborative effort amongst the Tseshaht First Nation, the University of Victoria, and Parks Canada, and was part of a 5-year plan to further research into the ancient history of the area. Part of the archipelago that forms an important section of the Pacific Rim National Park Reserve, Keith Island has a special status as a Tseshaht First Nation reserve. For millennia, the Broken Group Islands were the center of Tseshaht traditional territory. As in previous field seasons, the Tseshaht First Nation generously provided their small reserve on part of Nettle Island as the project base camp. For several thousand years, this site, called Klehoa, was one of their villages, although since the early 1950s, it has not been occupied. From base camp, the excavation site is a 15 to 20-minute boat ride through a maze of beautiful islands. The archipelago consists of more than 100 islands, forming a compact labyrinth in the center of the 800 square kilometers of Barkley Sound. The environmental richness of the islands is evident, as they were the home of a number of autonomous First Nations for millennia, until they all amalgamated with the Tseshaht First Nation several centuries ago. The first task of the 2018 field season was to remove the backfill from the previous year's work in order to continue the excavation of the ancient village.
Excellent.
So, you guys have established your vertical datum in the exact elevation that it was in 2017. Now, take measurements of the base of excavation from this new unit datum, and let's see if they correspond to last year, and I expect they will, and once they do, we can start our level 8 and get into digging.
Awesome.
Our top of level 8 depths. So that is where last year left off. Their bottom of excavation is your top of excavation for level 8. And then at the end, you're going to go through 10 centimeters, take the whole unit down. We're going to do a clean map of that new plan cut, 10 centimeters below where you are.
A level are our arbitrary depths below site datum. So our 10 centimeter increments that we're digging down in, and they do not correspond to any natural deposition.
So follow the ridge.
You'll see them in the wall. They'll slope down, and they'll cut across multiple arbitrary levels. So this one will be all in A, and then we'll have A and B as we're cutting across, and then down and down and down.
Stand out because they are not firecrack rock. Almost every piece of rock you'll find in the unit is going to be firecracked. You have to imagine almost every meal would require boiling stones, and those boiling stones are only going to last, I think, a maximum of 10 or 15 times before they explode. So each one of those meals is contributing huge amounts of firecrack rock into the site. So that and shell end up being a large bulk of the volume of the site. We're going to have broad categories, so that we're going to call all of that B. We're going to map out the distinctions that we see within B. So say there's whole shell in that corner versus black silt in this corner. And anytime we come onto a feature, we're going to, or an artifact or any articulated fauna, we're going to zoom in and really slow our excavations pace. About that much per screen load. We also don't want to overload the screen because it makes it harder to pick through.
Ideally, significant finds will be recovered in the excavation units, but subsequent dry screening followed by wet screening ensures a high discovery rate.
We're taking this down to the wet screen after this. So we've gotten rid of all of the loose, dry dirt that we could, but you can still see everything has that black, greasy, organic midden soil. That's all the fish grease, all the whale oil, all of that organic grease coating this black silt. And it is sticky. It obscures a lot of the smaller bone artifacts that we're going to find and a lot of the fauna. You can sort through this. A lot of projects do just do the dry screen and not the wet screen, but it really improves our capture rate of artifacts and fauna if we wet screen it. So we're washing off all of this sticky midden soil. Dry screen back to a bucket. Those buckets will then get stashed down here and then dumped into these screens for the final wet screen. And that fauna that was collected here will go back to the bags at the unit. You're gonna keep a couple of rows of buckets here waiting to be processed of people bringing dry screen stuff out.
Let me find some similar.
Oh, cool. It's like a little hook.
Yeah, it's like a little hook, but it's a bone.
Yeah.
And some wonderful little herring here. Herring vertebra.
Tiny. Is there any way to tell?
At the end of the workday, boats take the crew back to base camp. Base camp is where we relax, debrief, and enjoy the delicious food prepared by our Tseshaht First Nation cook, Wanda Robinson. As Parks Canada is a partner in the annual archaeological excavations, their personnel take part in the daily work as well as the evening lecture series.
Park Act is superseded by a bunch of other acts, and one of those is the Constitution Act. And we also recognize that we work in the traditional territories of many First Nations. And so especially those of us in the Cultural Resource Management Program, but also in the First Nations liaison. Parks Canada exists on paper, but we cooperatively manage it with the First Nations.
Each year, one of the highlights of our work is to interact with the beachkeepers. Tseshaht First Nation members who, under contract with Parks Canada, inform park visitors about their history and culture. An extremely important aspect of the annual excavations are the visits by Tseshaht community members. These events assist in a reconnection with their ancestral homeland, as well as providing an opportunity to share information about their long and rich history. So where are we? Do any of our visitors know? It's Keith Island, but what's its name? We know Kakmakimilh. Kakmakimilh is the proper name, because Keith Island, I don't know when it was named Keith Island, but it couldn't have been 100 years ago. Probably considerably less. This is a Tseshaht reserve. From the early 1950s on, there was no village here. No one was living here anymore. Kathy Robinson, your elder, 88 years old, was born here 88 years ago, 1930. So Wanda Robinson, who's our cook, our project cook, it's her mom. Born here. So it's not as if it's just ancient history, guys. People were living here quite recently. Mrs. Bill, Elizabeth Bill, she lived here when she was a child in the late 1940s. So this was a community. There were houses and stuff that recently. It's a village. It's a community. People are living here and doing stuff. And this was the early 1950s. So it's not just about ancient past. It's about pretty recent present. Now, how ancient past? Well, we have dates for the back of the site of 4,000 years. So, kids, you just know that your people have been here forever. Think of it as that. Twice daily tours are provided for park visitors. This enhances their awareness of the lengthy Tseshaht First Nation's occupation of their traditional territory. The excavation unit farthest inland from the present-day shoreline produced a radiocarbon date of 4,000 years. Dr. Iain McKechnie, project co-director, explained its significance.
We should see a sequence that, given what we know about post-glacial sea level and mid-Holocene, this is the mid-Holocene 6,000 to 4,000 years ago, mid-Holocene high stand when sea level is higher, we should be able to see that in action through the strata. Yeah, and the plywood.
No single archaeological site exists in isolation. Rather, it is part of a significant number of sites comprising both residential and resource locations that together represent the historic use of an area. The University of Victoria students comprising the bulk of the excavation crew were taken to several sites in order to better understand their interaction with each other and Keith Island. The first site to be visited was the ancient village of Tseshaht on Benson Island. Radiocarbon dating shows this site to have been occupied for 5,000 years. Tseshaht oral traditions name it as the origin place of the Tseshaht people. This clear area, as of yet not reclaimed by the surrounding forest, was the central area of a village of large cedar-planked houses extending along the shoreline for several hundred meters.
You got a radio, Jacob? Green radio? And little radio?
After several hours of lectures and touring the ancient village, the project members set off to another site important in Tseshaht history and oral traditions. During the 2017 excavation, the skeleton of an extinct dog species was partially uncovered. Referred to as woolly dogs, they were highly prized as source of thick hair for weaving purposes. Recovering the remainder of the skeleton was a high priority for the 2018 field season. On the day the dog skeleton was fully exposed, videographer Skye Ryan from CHEK TV News arrived.
Yeah, okay, I think this is good. There'll be a couple of usable ones in there. Sweet. Thank you for your light.
We've unearthed a woolly dog, which
As
is
a team, yeah, there's 4 of us working over here now. We finally reached it, and we're slowly brushing away around the edges, trying to cover as much of the bone as we can.
This long-extinct wool dog was prized for its fleece and companionship, is estimated to have been buried here 700 years ago. It's scraping away layers of time and sifting through pounds of past. Keith Island is revealing its long-buried story as a Tseshaht village in this archaeological dig.
This is their history book. This is a first edition, and it's the only copy. And we must make sure it doesn't get thrown on the bonfire, you know.
So in a team effort by the Tseshaht First Nation, Parks Canada, UVic's Archaeology Department, and the Banfield Marine Centre, they are uncovering what life on this island was like 4,000 years ago. What they ate, how they fished, and how the Tseshaht lived here.
Oh, it's wonderful. Especially when you do find an artifact. You're holding something that somebody hundreds or thousands of years ago shaped with their hands and used. And they're incredibly finely made.
An important aspect of each archaeological field school is noon hour lectures on the archaeology and ethnography of the regional First Nations. As we started doing more intensive survey work out here, finding the sites, recording the sites decades ago, 30 plus years ago, we started to realize, wait a minute, there are way too many large sites in Barkley Sound, and in particularly the Broken Group, way too many large village sites. Now, one group would not live in a large, have enough population, live in a site, build up the deposits to the point that they are very substantial, and then a kilometer or so away there's another huge site, and then a couple of kilometers away another huge site. You can't have that much buildup if it's the same people moving and using it. And why would you go 1 kilometer or 2 kilometers and have another big village? You could stay in the same one, and if there's a resource over there, you're out and you're back. It just didn't make sense. And the only thing that started making sense was, oh, well, what we probably have here are an altered situation, an original or previous situation where we have a number of First Nations. And so these larger sites are representing their principal villages. And they might have a couple of them, but they're not going to have 10, say, in the broken group. So we came to realize that there were, counterintuitively, small territories. It wasn't large territories with seasonal movement, because that went along with the large territories. You can't be in one village and go out to the extent of your territory and harvest resources of whatever kind and then come back in a day. No, it gets way too long. So then a seasonal round of movement started, and that seasonal round had to do with where were the herring blooming, where were the herring harvesting, congregating for a couple of months before spawning, and then where did they go? So when and where. So if you have a congregation of a resource, a concentration, I should say, of a resource, it's easier to exploit and harvest that resource. People are moving now because the territories are larger. You have a plethora of resource areas you didn't have before. You still may have had the resource, but you didn't have the quantity. For many years, coastal First Nations have participated in major canoe journeys to celebrate their cultural traditions. This year, several nations stopped at Keith Island during the trek to the United States.
From the house of Mamayut, we have traveled a long ways from our territory. Heshquiat, we are tired, we are hungry, we would like to come ashore and enjoy your food and stay in your beautiful territories. Yeah, oh, yeah, oh.
As the end of the field school approached, work in each unit concentrated on completing excavation and preparing for the recording of the stratigraphic layers of the mid-deposits, as shown in the walls of the pits. At the end of the excavation, the units were lined with plastic and refilled with soil to protect their structural integrity until the following field season. Returning to our base camp, personnel and project equipment was gathered for a trip across Barkley Sound to the Banfield Marine Sciences Center. There, a second 3-week course focused upon a preliminary analysis of the recovered faunal and artifactual materials.